and welcome to the One Lonely Owl YouTube channel. My name is Terry and I will be your host. Today's episode is a Spin Me a Yarn, which I've been titling such because a yarn in Newfoundland is to tell a story. So there's not much knitting content, although we will be talking about a few things knitting related today. Today, I'd like to discuss a couple of basic questions about where do I start when it comes to picking up a yarn-related craft. I've got 5 steps or 5 questions maybe that you might ask, and my opinions on how I think that should go. As always, I've got my notes here. I've also got my microphone a little bit closer today because yesterday we had some audio trouble, so you'll see my microphone is right there as well. And yeah, we're going to try to keep this short. So with that, I'm just going to dive in because I want to make sure that whatever it is I do today, I don't spend an hour like I did yesterday and still not be able to upload anything. So my apologies for that. So the first question on the basic skills question and what my answers are around that basic skills question is, where do I start? Do I start with knitting or do I start with crochet? First, you want to decide where it is that you want to put your effort. If you are hell-bent on learning how to knit, then choose knitting. However, if you eventually want to knit, but you're trying to take some baby steps, if you will, to get there, my suggestion would be to start out with learning how to crochet first and then pick up knitting. I've got a couple of reasons for that. Number one, crochet, in my opinion, and I am what we call bistitchual, I am able to knit and crochet as well. Crochet is, in my opinion, easier to learn than knitting. When you make mistakes in crochet, they're easier to remedy than in knitting. And the third reason is because your product when you are crocheting, because crochet uses more yarn, the products are faster. You're able to obtain a finished product a little faster than you would be in knitting, which then that boosts your confidence to continue to move forward. So number one, should I choose crochet or should I choose knitting? And my opinion is you should start with crochet first, followed by knitting, if that's what you so choose. Again, if you don't really want to and you want to dive right into knitting, that's fine. My opinion on that is just as it is. It's my opinion. The other thing that I want to acknowledge is that throughout this video, I'm actually going to be discussing the primary target for me being knitting. So I will be discussing what to do if you choose to knit. The next question that I would suggest you ask yourself is, when it comes to where do I start, let's assume now you've already mastered crochet and now you've moved on to knitting. What size of project should I take on? What size of needles? What size of yarn? The suggestion I would have is to start with a worsted weight yarn with the associated knitting needles. Now, let me just pause for a moment and I'm going to go find some worsted weight yarn as well as some needles. Sorry about that little pause there. So some worsted weight yarn. I'll also apologize for the lighting. Today the light is quite dark here, so I've got this blind closed and I'm just using artificial light. So it's not really important on a day where I'm not going to be showing you colors of anything. The worsted weight yarn that I've chosen is just something that I had in my stash, so I'm just going to show that here. It's fairly sort of large in gauge when you think about how thick the yarn is. This is like I said, just something that I had in my stash. It is a Loops and Threads Impeccable, which is a brand by Michaels. What I wanted to show you here was, whoops, sorry about that. This little thing on the label, this is a number 4 or a medium, and then here is where it shows you the recommended needle size. So a 6mm or a US 10 is what this brand recommends for you to use with this particular yarn. So I've taken a 6mm or a US 10, and that is one of my straight needles that I have from my grandmother. These are again, I'll hold it up with the yarn. Sorry about that. This is what we're dealing with when it comes to the size that would be recommended. So it's a fairly large needle. And the reason I would recommend that is, again, you would be able to get a finished product sort of quicker if you choose a larger gauge yarn and a larger needle. and it would still give you a great product at the end. So worsted weight and the needles to fit, and the easiest way that you quite honestly can do that is just go to any shop and you can find a yarn that you like, and if it's worsted weight, look at the size of the needles that's recommended on the label, and then you can choose those, and that's where you can start. The third thing I would ask myself is, what type of needle do I want to use? Do I want to use a straight needle? Do I want to use a circular needle? Or do I want to use a double pointed needle? So I have a couple of examples right here. You can get all kinds of types of double points. I've got some metal ones here as well as some bamboo. Each set of needles, in my opinion, has its pros and cons. I just realized I don't have a circular. So each set of needles has its pros and cons. This is a set of bamboo circular needles, so you'll see the two needles on the end, and they're attached to a cord, and that cord is a specified length. You can also get interchangeable sets with the same setup, but you can interchange the cord with the needle so that you can change the tips and whatnot. And I've already shown these before, but the metal and the bamboo double points, so they're just as it says, they have double points. So there's a point on the end, and there's a point on the other end. So I'm going to start with the straight needles. Some of the pros and some of the cons. The pro of a straight needle is that you can pretty much pick them up anywhere. You can get them at a lot of thrift stores have them, and they come in all shapes and sizes, and you can usually get them for really, really cheap. So that's your straight needle. Some of the cons is, quite honestly, my biggest concern about these is when you're first starting out, they kind of get in the way, in my opinion. They kind of get in the way when you're first learning to knit. This little thing that, you know, that depending on if you've got a long needle or not, it can kind of get in the way. The other is that it is limited by the size of the needle as far as the size of the project. So if you wanted to knit a blanket, for example, you'd have to knit that blanket in panels, because the only size of finished panel that you can complete with a straight needle is limited by the length of that needle. The other sort of pet peeve, if you will, of mine of a straight needle is that as you have your project on here, it weighs and weighs and weighs itself down, and you're holding all of that with your hand. So it does get quite cumbersome and tiresome for your hands. Next, we're going to talk about the double pointed needle. So the double pointed needle has as well some pros and cons. Some pros, one of the biggest pro of a double pointed needle is you could literally do anything with it. You can knit straight, you can knit in the round. You can knit socks or hats or the small circumferences. You can do anything with a set of 4 or 5 double pointed needles. That's probably the biggest pro. The other thing is you can also likely find a ton of these in thrift shops. I would say the biggest con for me on a double pointed needle is laddering. And so laddering is when, if you're making a sock, let's say, I have one right here. I will just show. If you're making a sock, let's say I'm doing this sock and I'm doing it on double pointed needles. Any time that there is a needle, like where a needle and another needle meet up, you have the chance of having like a gap in your sock. So I've knit these on magic loop, so I actually don't have laddering with these, but that is the reason why I choose to do magic loop, because if I chose to do double pointed needles, I always either had too tight, so there was a pucker, so you'd have something like a ridge along the edge of where those needles met, or I would have a gap. And obviously that's not ideal for your finished object, so I chose to sort of forego double pointed needles unless I'm doing real small circumference knitting, which is where I say these take the cake. The last and my preferred needle is not a bamboo circular, but is a circular set of needles. And the reason for that is, in my opinion, you can hold as many or as few stitches on it as you wish. They're the most versatile. Again, in my opinion, these are the most versatile types of knitting needles because you can put, again, as many stitches as fit from tip to tip, which in this case is quite long. You can find interchangeable sets, so you can invest, say, a larger amount of money at the beginning, but then you've got every possible combination that you could potentially ever need. And the other is that when the project is sort of hanging and when it's in progress, and if it's on the cord, it hangs on the cord and can be in your lap, and you can just be working on the project that is in front of you, the handful of needles that are in front of you, so you're not carrying the entire weight of the project. Let's see, I just want to make sure that I haven't missed anything. Oh, I did miss something. With a DPN, the other con is if you're a beginner knitter and you're not paying too much attention, your stitches can slip off one end because there is no end to sort of keep them in place like there is with a straight needle. So a straight needle has this little cap on the end. A double pointed needle does not have that. So your chances of slipping it off or having it slip off are much higher than if you were on, say, a circular where it would just fall down to the cord, or a straight needle where it has a cap on the end. Number 4, the fourth question that you would like to ask yourself is, what do I knit? Where do I start? So you've chosen your wool, you've chosen your yarn, you've chosen your needles, you've chosen the shape and size of your needles. Now what? Again, this is my opinion, so take it for what it's worth. The first thing I would choose to knit would be a dishcloth. And you've heard it all around. The reason I would personally recommend that is because a dishcloth is the right size of needles, the right size of yarn, as well as, it's readily available at all the craft stores, large, big box stores as well. But also, it's a quick knit, so you can practice your skills. It's easy, but you get something out of it at the end, which for me is a big psychological bump. When you're able to get something tangible at the end of investing your time in it, it feels really good. Whereas if you, let's say, compare a dishcloth to a scarf, both relatively easy patterns to follow, but a scarf you have to continue on and continue on and continue on until it's long enough to be a scarf. So my recommendation to start with is to start with a dishcloth. I have one right here. This, I believe the pattern is called Granny's Favorite Dishcloth or Grandma's Favorite Dishcloth, something like that. So that's what they look like. Basically, the construction of this, for those that don't know, is you start up at the top of one corner, you increase on the sides, and then you make a sort of a triangle shape, and then you come back to a point to basically make a diamond that when you turn on its edge, looks like a square. So again, the right needle size, the right yarn size, it's a really easy pattern to follow, and it's easily completed, which means by the end of it, you'll have something that you can actually use and be proud of, as opposed to having to knit for ages and ages and ages and still not get something out of it. The second thing I would say is, once you've sort of mastered the dishcloth and then you want to move on to something else, you could try something like a hat, but again, my recommendation would be a cowl. And for the primary reason of a cowl, a really basic cowl, like I believe, oh dear, what is the name of the Sockhead? The Sockhead cowl. I'll put down something below of whose pattern that is. But the Sockhead cowl is just sort of like a little bit of ribbing at the beginning, so that'll allow you to practice your knitting and your purling stitches, and then it's just knit in stockinette in the round, and then again with the knitting and the purling at the end. So something simple enough that you can do, and it's again done quick enough that it doesn't take forever, and you finally have a finished object at the end of it. Finally, the next step, I would say, is to start with a garment. So you've got your dishcloth, and maybe then you've gone on to a scarf. Then you've done a cowl, and then maybe a hat. And then your garment is your next step. So First off, what I will say is there's so many great basic knitting patterns. There's lots of really great patterns that have really big yarn and big needles so that it can be over quickly. And again, you'd have something that you'd be able to wear. And finally is that, yes, you absolutely can do it. If you can knit and you can purl and you know how to read a knitting pattern, there are millions of tutorials online. I swear they're everywhere of how to follow along. I actually even believe Marleybird, who I will link below, Marleybird has a YouTube video series where she teaches you how to knit a sweater from start to finish, from cast on, and all of the possible. And it's a video tutorial, so you can actually watch what she's doing. Really big fan of Marleybird and her tutorials. What I didn't say at the beginning of this video is what this video is a conversation. What it is not is a tutorial. So I apologize if you've stuck around this long and you were looking for a tutorial, because that is not what you will get. The other thing it isn't is it's not spinning related, even though Spin Me a Yarn is in the title. So again, apologize if you stuck it out this long and you have not gotten what you were looking for. The final thing that I wanted to say, so I guess if you wanted to say the fifth and final thing that I wanted to bring up was, it can be intimidating and it is totally possible. So although you may find that you are frustrated or you find that it's more difficult than you initially anticipated, I just want to put it out there that that is totally normal. And I've been knitting for 36 years. Yeah, I've been knitting for 36 years, and I still have times. Actually, I have a current project that has been put in the timeout bin so it can think about what it did. I'm an avid knitter. I'm a skilled knitter. I wouldn't consider myself an expert in any way, shape, or form. I still have to look up tutorials, especially when it comes to Kitchener stitch, but that's a conversation for another time. That all of us, we all experience some form of concern or frustration when it comes to our knitting. So even as a beginner, if you are intent on learning this skill, you absolutely can do it. All it takes is a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, and sometimes maybe if you're in the middle of your hat and you've made the same mistake 3 separate times, put the hat down, go back and knit a dishcloth, cleanse your palette, and then come back to the project that you were working on that was causing you some trouble. We're all in this together, and we do have some of the same experiences. So you're not alone. There's always somebody that can help you. If anybody on here is looking for some help, please let me know. I've got my contact information all in the description box right below this video. Please feel free to reach out to me if you're looking for anything, and maybe I can recommend a tutorial, or I can maybe help you out myself. But yeah, you can do it. That's step number 5. Give it a go. You absolutely got this. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Spin Me a Yarn. I really hope the audio worked on this one. Apologies for anyone who was looking for this episode yesterday. Like I said, I did have a bit of a concern. I'm not certain if it's the microphone or if it was my computer went to sleep and that's what powers the microphone, so I'm not totally certain. But I hope that this one actually works. I really hope you took something out of this conversation today. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and like, subscribe, and then click the bell icon so that you can be notified anytime I upload any further content. Until then, stay where you're to till I comes where you're at. Bye.